Hello everyone. So I may not be here in the flesh, but you still have one more week with me being with you in spirit, and you have virtual Miss Peralta for Chapter 7, Section 3, the Supreme Court. Let's jump in. The main idea for this section is the Supreme Court hears appeals, reviews laws, and strongly influences American society. The reading focus for this section is, what is the power of judicial review? What are the constitutional checks on the Supreme Court powers? And how has the Supreme Court strengthened constitutional rights? As always, please make sure that you are taking notes as we go through the lecture. You will need to write down everything that is on the slides, starting on the next slide, of course. And you will need to make sure that you emphasize the things that I emphasize in lecture. You will be taking a quiz at the end, or you will be taking a test at the end of the week. So make sure that you are also filling in your study guide. All right, let's get started. We're going to start out by talking about a very important power that the Supreme Court has, and that is the power of judicial review. Judicial review is the ability for the court to decide if a law or a presidential action is constitutional. The Supreme Court has the ultimate power of judicial review. Once a law has been passed by Congress and approved by the President, if the law is challenged, it could go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the decision could be made that the law is either constitutional, so we keep it, or it is unconstitutional, which means the law is void. Also, presidential actions are subject to this same decision. So if the president makes an executive order or one of the agencies in the executive branch makes a decision, the Supreme Court has the opportunity to review that decision and decide whether it is constitutional or not. The United States Constitution does not clearly give the United States Supreme Court the power of judicial review. The court got this power because John Marshall, Chief Justice John Marshall, gave this power to the court. The power of judicial review was established by John Marshall in the court case Marbury versus Madison. The power of judicial review was established by Chief Justice John Marshall in the Supreme Court case Marbury versus Madison. One more time. The power of judicial review was established by Chief Justice John Marshall in the Supreme Court case Marbury versus Madison. Let me tell you the story of Marbury versus Madison. There was a man, his last name was Marbury, and he was given a position as a judge by President John Adams. But then President John Adams lost the election, and Judge Marbury didn't get to take his job until after John Adams was no longer the president. So he sued the Secretary of Justice, also known as the Attorney General, James Madison, in order to get his position. So this would be an example of a civil case. No law has been broken, and Marbury is just trying to get his job as a judge. So the case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and that is why it is called Marbury versus Madison. And obviously, this case is important today because it established the principle of judicial review. Marbury versus Madison is the Supreme Court case that established the principle of judicial review. Marbury versus Madison the Supreme Court case that established the principle of judicial review. We're going to talk about several Supreme Court cases throughout this section, and you're going to need to make sure that you know all of them for the test that you're having later this week. So Marbury versus Madison is the first case that we'll talk about, and that is the Supreme Court case that established the principle of judicial review. And this was made a decision in 1803, and so this was what gave the Supreme Court the power, the very important power of judicial review. Bottom line to the story here, Judge Marbury never got his job. So he lost his Supreme Court case, and so he never got to become a judge. Because the Judiciary Act of 1789, which was what was going to give Marbury his job as a judge, was declared unconstitutional. On to the next slide. So the Supreme Court does not hear every single case that is appealed to them. They actually only hear about 100 cases per year. So every year, thousands of cases are appealed to the court, but the United States Supreme Court usually only hears about 100 of those cases. The justices, there's only 9 of them, so they can't hear every single case that would come to the Supreme Court. They have to pick and choose which cases they will hear. Oftentimes, the cases they select generally deal with important constitutional or national questions. For example, a couple months ago, we talked about the abortion case that was coming up before the Supreme Court and what the decision was going to be. Well, at this point in time of the recording, the Supreme Court has not handed down their decision yet in that case. So that would be an example of a national question that the Supreme Court is making a decision on. In order for a case to make it to the Supreme Court, 4 out of the 9 justices on the court must vote to hear the case. So of all the thousands of cases that are appealed, every case is looked at by the justices, and then at least 4 of the justices must say, we think that's an important case, we should listen to that. If a case does not get heard by the United States Supreme Court, the decision of the lower court stands, whether that is the state Supreme Court or the U.S. Court of Appeals. Whatever the decision was in the previous case, that is what ends up being the verdict. The court can also remand, which means return, a case to a lower court for a new trial. Maybe the Supreme Court thinks that something went wrong in the previous hearing of the case, but they don't have the time, or that it's not an important constitutional or national question. So they may have a lower court rehear the case instead of the United States Supreme Court hearing that case. This is what the inside of the United States Supreme Court looks like. The 9 chairs at the very front of the picture are where the justices sit. Then the 6 chairs just below that, well, I guess actually it's 2 sets of 5 chairs. Those are where the attorneys and the people involved in the case will sit. And then all of the other chairs are where people coming to view the Supreme Court case have the opportunity to sit. In just a moment, I will tell you my story of when I got to go hear a case at the Supreme Court. Hearing and deciding cases. So imagine you have been approved to have your case heard by the Supreme Court. What's your trial going to look like? Well, The Supreme Court hears cases only by oral argument, and that means that each side gets 30 minutes to argue their case before the Supreme Court justices. So the lawyers for each party in the case have 30 minutes to present their arguments. And during these 30 minutes, the justices also have the opportunity to ask questions of each lawyer. So the lawyer might try and present their case, but really this is the time for questions and answers to be given to the justices of the Supreme Court. So basically, each case is only 1 hour long. That's because the justices have looked at all of the arguments about the case and looked at the lower court decisions, and they pretty much understand what's going on in the case. They don't need the lawyers to explain to them what's going on. Then, once the lawyers have presented their arguments to the United States Supreme Court, the justices have asked their questions, then the justices spend their time reading the written arguments and considering what was said in court so that they can make their decision. Then they have a private meeting to vote on the case and decide what happens. Each justice has one vote, and the decisions are reached by a simple majority. Remember, there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court, so as long as 5 justices agree on a certain decision, then that is what the court will go with. So several years ago, I got to go visit the United States Supreme Court. The way that you get in is for every court case that is being argued before the Supreme Court, you can go and stand in line outside the Supreme Court and hope that you get in on the day that the case is being heard. So we got up super early in the morning and we went and stood in line, and it turned out that one of the cases that was being heard before the Supreme Court that day was a First Amendment case. So remember, the First Amendment gives us the 5 freedoms of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of petition, and freedom of assembly. So it just so happened that the case that we were hearing was relating to the First Amendment, and so a lot of people wanted to hear the case. So we're standing in line, and more people were coming, and then finally it came time for us to start walking into the court. We got to go up the front steps of the United States Supreme Court building, and then we got to go into the court and listen to the 30 minutes by each side, the oral arguments of the case. So it was really cool, and so now I can say that I've gotten to listen to a case argued before the Supreme Court. All right, so that's my story. Moving on. We're still talking about hearing and deciding cases. When the United States Supreme Court justices have made a decision, they vote, and then the court delivers its opinion. In this instance, the word opinion means an explanation of the reasoning that led to the decision. So an opinion is the explanation of the reasoning that led to the decision. This is important because the opinion delivered by the United States Supreme Court is binding to all lower courts. So whatever the Supreme Court decides, it sets a precedent, and all other lower courts will follow that same precedent. Now, when the court reaches a decision, they only have to have 5 justices that agree. So that means that of the 9 justices, there could be 4 that don't agree with the decision. So when the court issues a decision, it will have the justices write, one justice will be selected to write the main court opinion. And that is the one that is binding on all lower courts. But Other justices who are on the same side as the main opinion may choose to write a concurring opinion. And this is a statement written by a Supreme Court justice who agrees with the majority's decisions, but for a different reason. Whatever their reason might be, they will explain it in their concurring opinion. There's also justices who disagree with the main opinion. Talk about that on the next slide. If a justice disagrees with the main opinion that the Supreme Court has come up with, so they're in the minority, the less than 5 justices, they can also write a dissenting opinion. And the dissenting opinion explains why the justice believes that the majority opinion is wrong. This opinion has no effect on the law, but they are still important. This decision has no effect on the law, but they are still important. This decision has no effect on the law, but they are still important. Why? Because many of these dissenting opinions have later become the law of the land when the beliefs of society and the opinions of the justices change. We're going to look at an example of this happening with Plessy versus Ferguson when we talk about the segregation cases later on. Now it's time to talk about the justices on the Supreme Court. The size of the Supreme Court is determined by Congress. The Congress decides how many justices there will be on the Supreme Court. The size of the Supreme Court is determined by Congress. Basically, Congress passes a law, and that is how many justices there will be on the Supreme Court. Since 1869, we have had 9 justices on the Supreme Court. There is 1 Chief Justice and 8 Associate Justices. And Congress decides how many justices there will be. Just like any other judge or justice at the federal level, they are appointed by the president and approved by a majority vote in the Senate. Justices are appointed for life. So just like we had recently with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she served as a justice until she passed away. Or the justices can choose to retire. We have a justice, Stephen Breyer, who has decided to retire at the end of this term. And he's been on the court for a while. Now, a justice can stay for as long as they want, but they can be impeached. So justices are appointed for life, but just like the president can be impeached, a justice can be removed through impeachment. Justices can be impeached. A justice can be impeached. The Constitution does not lay out any special requirements to be a Supreme Court justice. Remember all the requirements that we talked about to be president or vice president or a member of the House or a member of the Senate? For some reason, the people who wrote the Constitution did not give any special requirements for the Supreme Court justices. The first check and balance of power on the Supreme Court is that the president appoints the justices that serve on the Supreme Court, and the Senate must confirm them. The first check and balance on the United States Supreme Court is that the president appoints the justices, and the Senate must confirm them. The first check and balance on the Supreme Court, the president appoints the justices, and the Supreme Court must confirm them. Another check is, if the court rules that a law is unconstitutional, there are 2 options. First, the Congress can rewrite the law to make it constitutional. And second, they can amend the Constitution to include whatever it was that they wanted to pass. Make sure you know this. If the court rules that a law is unconstitutional, Congress has two options. They can rewrite the laws to make the law constitutional, or they can amend the Constitution to include the new laws. If the court rules that a law is unconstitutional, Congress can rewrite the laws to make them constitutional, or they can amend the Constitution to include new laws. One example of this is that Congress had passed an income tax. The United States Supreme Court ruled that income tax was unconstitutional, so Congress worked to get the 16th Amendment passed, and we now have income tax. All right, we have made it to the last slide. How can the United States Supreme Court strengthen people's rights? Well, the Supreme Court allows the Constitution to change and meet the demands of the changing times. We're going to start with a Supreme Court case that was decided in 1954, and that is Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. In this case, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the segregation of public schools was unconstitutional. Remember how I said at the beginning of lecture that you're going to need to know some Supreme Court cases? Well, here's another one. Brown versus Board of Education ruled that segregation of public schools was unconstitutional. Brown versus Board of Education ruled that segregation of public schools was unconstitutional. This case is significant because it reversed an earlier opinion. There was an earlier opinion, we mentioned it earlier, Plessy versus Ferguson, that said that segregation was okay as long as the facilities or the schools that were available were equal. But Brown versus Board of Education pointed out that segregation is inherently or at its root unequal and that it violates the 14th Amendment. So the United States Supreme Court delivered a mandate with the decision that it gave in Brown versus Board of Education, saying that all public schools must be desegregated with all deliberate speed. Now, let's go back to Plessy versus Ferguson for just 1 second. In Plessy versus Ferguson, some of the justices chose to write a dissenting opinion. They did not agree with the majority in Plessy versus Ferguson. When we come to Brown versus Board of Education, we see that the dissenting opinion in Plessy versus Ferguson became the majority opinion in Brown versus Board of Education. So this sometimes happens. The decision that was made in Brown versus Board of Education is what made it so that we have all races in every school in the United States of America. If you've ever seen the movie Remember the Titans, it's on Disney Plus in case you want to watch it. It shows what happened to schools across the country when Brown versus Board of Education was put into practice. One more Supreme Court case that we need to talk about that has impacted the rights of the accused people is Miranda versus Arizona. Here we have an individual versus a state. So in this case, the court decided that police must inform arrested suspects that of their rights before the police can question them. This is called repeating the Miranda rights. If you've ever watched a crime show, then you have seen the police arrest someone and they say to the person getting arrested, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. That is because of Miranda versus Arizona. Last case you need to make sure you know, Miranda versus Arizona. The police must inform arrested suspects of their rights before questioning them. Miranda versus Arizona. The police must inform arrested suspects of their rights before questioning them. Police must inform arrested suspects of their rights before questioning them. And that's it. Remember to study for your test, and I will miss you guys. Virtual Miss Peralta is out.